from St Joseph's College in Lucan visited Leinster House this morning. One of the first questions they asked me was, how is Ireland supporting Palestine? And I was proud to be able to say that Ireland is leading on this internationally. Ireland was one of the first countries to call for a ceasefire. Ireland was one of the first countries to continue to back funding for UNRWA, to support the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And today the Palestinian flag flies proudly over Dáil Éireann as we formally recognise the State of Palestine. Caoimhe Duffy, a sixth-year student from that same school, St Joseph's, just last week won the Thomas Francis Meagher Scholarship for her poem, Dóchas Faoin Amrat, Hope Beneath the Flag. And I'd like to finish Lascen Corla by reading a section of this poem in its English translation. Now the flag is a symbol of peace, and there will be hope for the children of Ireland and the children of the world. If you're born in Cork or in Donegal, in Ukraine or in Palestine, when you see the Irish flag flowing, it says 100,000 welcomes.
The Zionist government of Netanyahu seems to believe that they can act with impunity, so much so that they've threatened Ireland, Norway and Spain with dire consequences for doing what we are doing today, what should have been done decades ago, for doing what all states in the world should be doing as a minimum, and for doing what this Parliament agreed to do 10 years ago. Most of the world's nations are looking on as Israeli forces are involved in continuous barbaric attacks on defenceless Palestinians involved in genocide. For decades, they have imposed a stranglehold on the region, and in revenge for Hamas's barbaric, unjustifiable attack on the music concert in Israel on October 7th last year, they have activated their murderous plans. Hoppig Realtas Benjamin Netanyahu and Desh Taresh Unsi Marafach Hamas Israel in Gaza, Skris Umlan Yanov Gaza, and Poblaun Awaru Nor Risha, agus Tilla Tolav Aguidon Palestine, Onos Nakmech, Ein Chance, Gemech Start Palestine, Bio Bahach, Amakan Shop. The Israeli government are blatantly targeting, murdering men, women and children, having starved them, destroyed their homes, shift them here, there and everywhere in a small enclave of Gaza as if they were cattle, before corralling them into kill zones where they drop their precision bombs on them while sleeping in their tents or in shelters pulled together from the rubble of their homes or surrounding buildings, bombed out of existence for over 7 months now in a modern-day carpet bombing of a city. While within minutes many Western nations rightly sought to impose sanctions against Russia and send aid to Ukraine and Ukraine's beleaguered government, the world has been very slow to act in defence of or to aid the besieged, starving Palestinian population of the Gaza region. The message should go out loud and clear. Sanctions now, boycott now. It's high time that the human rights clauses of the European Med Agreement should be triggered and triggered in full.
Dr. John Braid.
Thanks, Mr. I want to welcome Ireland's long overdue recognition of the State of Palestine. But as we look on that state today, or what remains of it, only a fraction of that remains under Palestinian authority. Israel has steadily and illegally annexed huge areas of Palestinian territory, employing a strategy of apartheid, displacement and dispersion. Palestinians remaining in these territories are left in a fragmented people living in South Africa like Bantustans, subject to indiscriminate violence from both the state and illegal colonial Israeli settlers. There are over 700,000 Jewish Israeli settlers living in over 144 illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Recently, the Israeli Minister of Settlement and National Missions said that there will never be a Palestinian state in the land of Israel, and every cultured person in the world knows that this land is ours for the Israeli people and only us. They claim that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. Today's announcement, while long overdue, is a beacon of hope to Palestinians that there still is a Palestinian state and that there still are Palestinian people and always will be. This action today should not be symbolic. The next steps need to take place now. As the bombs continue to fall on Rafah and elsewhere in Gaza, we need to see the full implementation of international law. We need to see the application of sanctions, not just against the State of Israel, but of the individual architects of its campaign of genocide. We need to see the establishment of a full Irish embassy now in East Jerusalem. We need to see the implementation and enactment of the Occupied Territories Bill. We need to see the introduction of the Illegal Israeli Settlements Bill. And we need a commitment that if the war criminal Netanyahu sets foot in this state, that he will be arrested immediately. Let the message go from the Dáil here today to the people of the world, on behalf of the Irish people, that in our thousands and in our millions, we are all Palestinians.
Social Democrats, Holly Cairns.
And I just want to begin by warmly welcoming the Palestinian ambassador and everyone in the gallery. I'm proud to stand here today with the Palestinian flag raised outside as we officially recognise the State of Palestine. It's more important than ever that we take a stand as a country to make our support for the people of Palestine clear. I was struck by the words of Charlotte Phillips, a Palestinian footballer who played in the recent game with Bohemians and Dalymount. As she stood on the pitch with thousands of Palestinian flags waving and chants filling the stadium, she stated, "They thought they could get rid of us, and they can't. This is proof of our existence." The simple things that we take for granted, the ability to fly our flag, sing our anthem, to express our culture and nationality proudly and openly, is out of reach for millions of Palestinians. As the very existence of Palestine is under threat, it's essential that we do everything in our power to assist the Palestinian people in their time of need. Today, as we stand in this chamber, Israeli tanks are entering Rafah. According to Israel, Rafah was a safe zone. Because of that, more than 1 million people were displaced there. Now, it's a battleground, like everywhere in Gaza, because nowhere is safe. There is no safety from disease, from famine, or from Israeli missiles. On Sunday, Israel bombarded a refugee camp in Rafah, killing at least 45 people. Many of those who died were burned alive inside their tents. The images of families desperately trying to save each other from the enormous flames, of charred bodies, of maimed children, are some of the most horrific to emerge in these 8 months of relentless slaughter. These images should be seared into the memory of every person and every government who has excused and facilitated this genocide. Israeli claims that this attack was a tragedy and that they will investigate how it happens are barely worth acknowledging. We already know what the conclusion of this so-called investigation will be, because it will be the same as every other investigation into the murder of Palestinians by Israel. It was a mistake. They were aiming at Hamas. This won't happen again until it does. And the exact same excuses are churned out over and over again. Worst of all, these pathetic excuses will be accepted by their allies. Germany has not even waited for the Israeli investigation to take place before declaring it a mistake. Meanwhile, Germany continues to supply Israel with weapons. German military exports to Israel have increased tenfold. For too long, the international community's reaction to conflicts like this is to defer to America. But the Americans will not act to stop Israel's carnage. Joe Biden has made it clear that there is no red line for Israel, there is no action Israel can take that will stop America from arming and funding this genocide. The ICJ has called on Israel to immediately halt their military offence in Rafah, but their call is falling on deaf ears. This is a real test for the concept of the EU as a peace project, as a force for good. It is a test that is currently spectacularly failing. EU leaders must ask themselves, do they respect human rights? Do they respect the Genocide Convention? Do they respect the Geneva Convention? Do they respect the independence of the ICJ and the ICC? The unprecedented ICC decision to seek arrest warrants for Israeli government and Hamas leaders speaks to the enormity of Israel's war crimes in Gaza. The Israeli government is doing everything it can to avoid accountability. The Guardian reported today that the former head of Mossad threatened a chief prosecutor of the ICC and tried to pressure her into abandoning war crimes investigations. According to accounts shared with ICC officials, he is alleged to have told her, quote, "You should help us and let us take care of you. You don't want to be getting into things that could compromise your security or that of your family." Last Ceann Comhairle, the recognition of the State of Palestine is welcome and long overdue, but it must be the first step of many. We cannot maintain normal diplomatic and trade relationships with a country committing a genocide before our eyes. We need to push harder to suspend the EU-Israel trade agreement. We need to stop Ireland's export of dual-use technology to Israel. We need to enact the illegal Israeli settlement divestment bill and the occupied territories bill. We need to do absolutely everything in our power, use every lever to stop this genocide, and even if we have to act alone.
Dr. Gary Gannon.
Good morning, last Ceann Comhairle. Let me begin by acknowledging Ambassador Gillan, our friend, acknowledging the members of the Palestinian community who are in the gallery, and in particular extending my warmest welcome to Dr. Wahil Abu Namas, his wife Suha, and their 7 children to the chamber. Bombed from their home in Gaza, they found refuge in my community in East Wall, and they have made our community all the better for it. We're so sorry for every single one of your suffering. We mourn with you, and we hope that this will come to an end. In beginning, let me acknowledge the importance of what we're doing today in recognition and recognising the State of Palestine. I'd also like to recognise that our government has gone further than most because the bar has been so low. I hope that you will recognise that this cannot be the end and that we have so much more that we need to do, and this in itself is not even close to being enough. But also, please, do not call this a victory for diplomacy or any one approach, because it simply is not. Well, the Taoiseach talked of intense discussions that led on for months behind closed doors. There wasn't a roof or a door in Gaza that wasn't blown off its hinges. If diplomacy is acting at a slower pace of genocide, diplomacy is failing. So as we come here today, there will be a singular call across the chamber, and I hope it's listened to, that we must intensify our efforts, that we must go further, that we must go beyond ourselves. If diplomacy is acting at a slower pace than genocide, it is failing, and genocide is exactly what is happening. We see that in the enforced famine that is being impacted on the people of Gaza. We see that in the 2,000-pound bombs that are being dropped every single day. There was a time in this chamber in around about late October, November, when we debated whether Israel had bombed the hospital, and we are told to be careful because we don't know the full facts yet. Well, at this point, Israel has bombed every single hospital in Gaza, and we know the facts. They've obliterated universities as a way of ending the cultural and intellectual integrity of Gaza. They have killed 36,000 people at this point, not counting those who remain on the rubble, including 15,000 children. They make no distinction between man, woman and child. We know the facts. They have targeted journalists precisely to prevent them from telling the truth. UN workers annihilated. We know the facts. What we have known is that until very recently, until the last 48 hours, until potentially this act, Israel has faced no consequence. Absolutely none. So, as we recognise the State of Palestine, recognise what led us to this part, the suffering, the horror, the death, the inhumanity, the apartheid that had to bring us to this particular space, just by which we recognise Palestine, 31 years after the Oslo Accords. So we're in acknowledging the pace of that, which was too slow, which led to all this devastation. Please, can we intensify our efforts? Can we please go further? Israel-EU trade agreement finally came onto the table last night. far too slow. Humanitarian clauses built in may as well be taken out. We talk of the fact that we somehow have to deal with Israel through our trade as if they were a normal entity, because we're told legal advice that is unseen suggests to us that we cannot enact the occupied territories bill. Why not? I mean, boycott is a tradition given to the world by the Irish people against our own oppressor. Why can't not we apply that to the oppressor of others? So in terms of the occupied territories bill, we have to. We are told that we cannot cease diplomatic relations with Israel, despite the fact that Israel behaves like no other entity, despite the fact that Israel summons our ambassadors and makes them watch videos for the world's media to mock and to condemn. Why do we treat Israel as if it's a normal entity? Why do we have to maintain the illusion of democracy, the pageantry of diplomacy? All the while bombs are raining down and raining down. Bring this horror to an end. It will not end without consequence. Israel have never faced consequences for their actions, and you've only become more emboldened, more sinister, more absolutely indiscriminate in their massacring. And every once in a while, I say, oh, sorry, we got that one wrong. And we're supposed to go, well, fair enough. No more. Bring this horror to an end. Bring the slaughter to an end. Go beyond that. If you believe in a two-state solution, recognise that one has been obliterated and that we cannot have a normal relations under those conditions. Thank you.
Alaskan Corlin, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. And I want to start by paying my compliments to the Taoiseach and Micheál Martin for taking the lead on this, for doing the groundwork over a number of months to get us to this position. And of course, I want to recognise the role of the Taoiseach, Mr Ryan, and indeed many members in this House who have called for recognition for a long time. I believe it is an important moment. It is symbolic, but also practical. And it underlines our view that the Palestinians' right to have their own state is as valid and equal to that of the Israeli people. It means that the starting point for any internationally mediated talks should be that there is a fully fledged Palestinian state. That is not a Palestinian entity, not a form of a state, not a dependency, not a reservation or a Bantustan, but a fully fledged independent state. Negotiations, of course, will have to take place over borders, about the transition, about security guarantees for Israel and Palestine, which will be needed, about normalisation of relations between Israel and all of the other countries of the region, which is crucial, and also the fraught question of the future of refugees and the holy sites. I would like to take an opportunity to make a few points that I think are relevant. First of all, recognition of Palestine is not support for Hamas, nor recognition of Hamas in any way. The United States recognises Cuba and Iran. Nobody would suggest that the United States endorses the governments of those places. We recognise Afghanistan and Russia. Nobody would suggest that means recognition or support for the Taliban or for Putin. And indeed, we recognise Israel and have done since independence. And that does not mean that we support Israel's government or the actions of the IDF. Recognition, as the government has said, is based on the 1967 borders, and these can only be changed by negotiation and agreement, not by violence or annexation. I know that it is popular to refer to the term from the river to the sea. That may refer to different things to different people. To some people, it means the end of the Israeli state. That is not what we're saying here. We're saying a two-state solution, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state in the area between the river and the sea. Ireland now joins about 140 countries out of 200 countries in the world that now recognise the state of Palestine. We are not in the minority. We are in a very large majority of countries in the world that recognise the state of Palestine. Those that do not are almost all in the global north, in the west if you prefer that term, and they are countries that often have their own history of colonialism and imperialism, and that is not a coincidence. I do think more countries will follow suit. I'm encouraged that President Macron in France has said that it's no longer taboo to recognise the Palestinian state before peace talks are concluded. I note that Penny Wong in Australia has not ruled it out, that Belgium, Malta and Slovenia have said they'll do so when the time is right. And I do hope that what's being done here by Spain, by Norway and by Ireland will help members of the public in other countries and politicians in other countries to put pressure on their governments for recognition and then for further action. In terms of next steps that we can take, and I do believe that we are correct to pursue things in a way that is multilateral, not unilateral, and seeks to bring people with us, not prove how righteous we are. And I think when it comes to talking to the United States, we should take up the call for the Leahy Act, or the Leahy Act, to be extended to Israel. This is legislation that exists in America that says that when America sells weapons to other countries, it can do so with conditions, conditions applied to the general forces or to specific forces, and that is legislation that I think long since overdue that it be applied to the IDF. And I think at EU level we can continue to press for a review, if not a suspension, of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. I think for too long those of us in the Western world, or most of us in the Western world, have allowed ourselves to be convinced that Israel is a liberal Western democracy and belongs in our club. That clearly is not the case. This is a country that does not share our values anymore, if it ever did. We can see that from its actions in Gaza. It is profoundly illiberal and far from being a democracy in the European or American sense, is a country in which there are different sets of rights for different sorts of people. Jewish people with one set of rights, even if they only arrived yesterday. Israeli Arabs with a different set of rights, even though they may have been there for generations. And then, of course, those who live under occupation under military law for 70 years now in the West Bank and Gaza with a different set of rights. Again, a fourth set of rights if you include the Druze community. And there's no democracy in the world that operates on that basis. In terms of the change of policy by the government, previously we'd taken the view that recognition should only happen when a two-state solution is agreed. And that has changed, not because of the events of October 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th for that matter, but rather the rejection of a two-state solution by the Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister. The fact that no serious talks have taken place since 2014, and of course Israel's actions in Gaza. And while Israel, like all states, has the right to defend itself, it doesn't have the right to do wrong. And I believe we are witnessing a war of revenge, the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, and gross violations of international humanitarian law and basic principles of humanity. And Ceann Comhairle, I believe the war in Gaza is a disaster. Most of all, of course, for the Palestinian people who've been killed, injured, maimed, are bereaved or suffering. But it's also a disaster for Israel. It has gone on now for 6 months, and it is a total failure. Hamas has not been defeated. The hostages have not been released, and some are now dying in captivity. Israel is losing support around the world, in Europe, and indeed in the United States, where people of colour and those of the younger generation are increasingly turning against Israel. And it is radicalising people in the Middle East and other parts of the world, some of whom may become a security threat to Israel in the future. It is a total military and political failure, not just a humanitarian catastrophe. Finally, Ceann Comhairle, I just want to say a few words about anti-Semitism. Ireland is a safe country for Jewish people. We have a small Jewish community here for centuries, which has made a valuable contribution to the state, in politics and law, in business, in medicine and other fields, and we're grateful for that. To my knowledge, no Jewish person in Ireland has ever been killed or even seriously injured as a consequence of their faith or identity. However, anti-Semitism does exist in Ireland, and we should be upfront about that. It exists in every country. And for the first time, I know that some Irish Jewish people feel a conflict between their Irish and Jewish identities, and that is very sad. And I have Jewish friends in New York, in London and other places who for the first time in their lives are uncomfortable about wearing the Star of David around their neck, are expressing their Jewish identity and feel threatened by some of the things that happen at pro-Palestine rallies. And I think we must say today that we also unequivocally reject anti-Semitism. Irish Jews and Jewish people in general are not responsible for the actions of the Israeli government or the IDF. Many are not even citizens of Israel. And we know during the Troubles, when the IRA committed terrible atrocities and targeted civilians, sometimes Irish people in the UK and other places were made to feel bad about that or made to feel responsible for that. and that was wrong. And we must make sure that we protect Jewish communities around the world and the Irish Jewish communities from that kind of politics or those kind of attitudes. And we shouldn't forget that Israel itself is a society in which many people are protesting for a ceasefire, and many support a two-state solution if they can be confident that a Palestinian state will not be used as a base to attack them. Hamas is a deeply anti-Semitic organisation, and we need to be clear in speaking to Palestinians that there can be no role for Hamas in the future government of Gaza or a Palestinian state, at least not with our support and assistance. Finally, just in relation to BDS, I think we need to be smart in the way that we approach this and proportionate. Yes, it's right to boycott and divest from settlement activity, but I don't think it would be right to do so from the Israeli state that we recognise. Similarly, I think when we engage in boycotts, we need to be careful not to boycott the wrong people. There is a strong strain of academics in Israel, human rights activists and civil society who oppose the human rights abuses that are occurring and have a different vision for their state. I think it's important that they're the ones who shouldn't be boycotted or ostracised, and we should do so on an appropriate basis. Thank you.
You were to have 6.5 minutes. If you like, in 15 minutes there's another government slot and there's 6.5 minutes available.
Yeah,
so
no, I'll proceed now.
You proceed now?
Yeah.
Well, we'll take the 3 minutes from the next government slot.
Yes,
give it
perfect,
to you now.
Perfect.
Okay. With the agreement of the House.
Ceann Comhairle, May 28th, 2024 is an historic day. Today, Ireland formally recognises the state of Palestine, along with Spain and Norway, based on the 1967 borders. This brings to 8 the number of European states who have done this. It has taken many years and much diplomacy and negotiation to bring us to this point. In 1980, Ireland was the first EU state to back the principle of Palestinian statehood. In 2014, as we've heard, the Dáil and Seanad passed motions calling on the government to officially recognise the state of Palestine. And then in 2020, a commitment was given to do this in the programme for government, agreed between the 3 coalition parties at the appropriate time. In recent days, the question has been asked, why do this? What is the practical effect of this policy decision? Some have said it's nothing more than a symbolic gesture. Recognition at this time, Ceann Comhairle, given all that has happened, particularly since the brutal attacks by Hamas on October 7th, helps advance the cause of a two-state solution whereby both Israel and Palestine can exist side by side in peace and security. It is clear that a two-state solution is the only viable option to secure the just and lasting peace in the Middle East for which we all hope for. Unfortunately, this move has been criticised by the Israeli government, so let's just put a few things on the record. Recognition of the state of Palestine does not constitute anti-Semitism, and neither does it indicate support for Hamas or reward terrorism. Nor does it mean that Israel does not have the right to exist. The complete opposite is in fact the case. And finally, condemnation of the actions of the current Israeli government in Gaza should not be interpreted as anti-Semitism or opposition to the Israeli state itself. Ireland's guiding principle on this issue and on foreign policy generally ultimately boils down to a commitment to international humanitarian law and to upholding fundamental human rights. The actions of the current Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza, must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. The Israeli ambassador to Ireland, Dana Ehrlich, is well able to defend the policies of our government by making all sorts of threats on Ireland and testing our patience and tolerance in the process. You would have to ask at this stage, is Israel going to continue as a liberal democracy at all? The treatment of the Irish ambassador to Israel in response to the recognition announcement by the Israeli Foreign Ministry was disgraceful and not in keeping with the norms of a democratic state or international diplomacy. In recent years, we have witnessed the rowing back on democratic norms in Israel, as witnessed by the mass protests on the streets, which started well before the October 7th attacks. And now we are watching the Israeli government completely ignoring the rulings of the International Court of Justice. As we know, in the context of the genocide case taken by South Africa, the ICJ ordered Israel to halt its military offensive on Gaza, among other things. And the response of Israel was to launch a full-scale military operation on Rafah, which also included attacking the Rafah refugee camp. Ireland must continue its efforts to secure a ceasefire in Gaza. There must be an unconditional release of the hostages, and we should continue to advocate for safe and unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza. In this regard, I would like to pay tribute to the Taoiseach and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Micheál Martin, for the time and effort he has been putting in to resolving these issues. Ireland has led the way on these matters. I am aware that the Taoiseach is engaging in talks this week with EU and Arab leaders to help advance the Arab peace vision. Now is most definitely the time for the international community to get behind these initiatives once and for all. It is welcome that EU foreign ministers yesterday, for the first time, discussed the prospects of imposing sanctions on Israel, given its response, or lack of it, to the ICJ orders. In addition, the EU needs to support the reform plan of the Palestinian Authority. It is also time, finally, for the European Commission to review the EU-Israel trade agreement, having regard to its human rights clauses. And I welcome the developments yesterday at the meeting of EU foreign ministers in this regard. So, as we've heard from other speakers, there is much work to be done, but today is an important milestone. As we've heard, the Palestinian flag is flying proudly in the grounds of Leinster House. And today is just a first step. We must now do all that we can to finally bring about a just and lasting peace in this very troubled part of the Middle East. So, Ceann Comhairle, I will leave it at that and conclude my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy High. Deputy Louise O'Reilly is now sharing with Deputy Pauline Tully, please.
Ceann Comhairle, I've listened to the commentators in recent days talk about the significance of the recognition of Palestine here in the Dáil. There are some who are saying that this is merely symbolism and that symbolism doesn't matter. If you doubt the power of symbolism, I would encourage you to listen to the words of the Palestinian national team player Charlotte Phillips, who lined out against the Bows women on May the 15th in Dalymount. She spoke after the game with her grandparents by her side, and she said, "They thought they could get rid of us, and they can't. This is proof of our existence." And while we rightly mark this occasion, Ceann Comhairle, I cannot get the images from Rafah out of my mind. Children massacred, maimed, families destroyed and people burned alive. The sheer brutality of the actions of Israel must have consequences. We can and we must do more. We must do it, and we must do it now. And to hear government spokespersons telling us that we have to wait for the European Union, so we didn't wait in 1984. Mary Manning didn't wait in 1984. She showed leadership, and we need to show that leadership now. There is no hiding place anymore. None. We can see it on our phones. It's in our living rooms. Even those who were not aware of what was happening in Palestine cannot be unaware now. We have to do more than symbolism, although symbolism is important. And I want, in the few moments that I have, to pay tribute to the men and women of the Trade Union Friends of Palestine and the work that they have done. Long ever before we had social media to bring us our news, we had the Trade Union Friends of Palestine bringing the message of the Palestinian struggle to union conferences, to training sessions and directly onto the shop floor. People like my friend Mags O'Brien, a tireless campaigner and an activist who never, ever missed an opportunity to remind us to keep the people of Palestine in our thoughts and in our actions. And for MAGs and for all of the campaigners, today is significant. But what we do tomorrow and every day after is what will really matter. That means real consequences for the Israeli genocide and no votes for Ursula von der Leyen in the European Parliament. Go Maigat.
It will be 10 years in December when a Sinn Féin motion was passed mandating the government to officially recognise the State of Palestine. It is truly an historic development that Ireland is now finally recognising Palestinian statehood, but it is gravely unfortunate, however, that it has taken so long and that it has taken the savagery, especially in the last 7 months, for the government to finally act. The cruelty and barbarity over the last 7 months in Gaza has resulted so far in over 35,000 Palestinians killed by the Israeli military, with more than 70,000 injured. Recognition in and of itself is not enough. The government must put in place sanctions against Israel for their ongoing breaches of international law. Israel's brutal attacks on civilians sheltering in Rafah on Sunday underscores the need for sanctions to bring Israel into adherence with the recent order of the International Court of Justice that they cease military operations in Rafah. The government needs to stop hiding behind EU procurement obligations. The 2014 EU directives on public procurement contain specific provisions excluding tenderers who are guilty of certain human rights infringements from participation in public procurement. So, according to a recent report commissioned by Uplift, Ireland imported military equipment from Israel to the value of at least €8.5 million, primarily from military drones and other equipment, in the last 10 years to 2024. Half of this trade was with Israeli government-owned company Aeronautics Defence Systems, whose unmanned aerial vehicles or drones have been used in the current onslaught on Gaza. Elbit Systems, also beneficiary of state contracts, has been subject to allegations including the production of cluster bombs. Elbit surveillance technology is used in Israeli settlements as well as in Israeli annexation wall, which the International Court of Justice deemed as unlawful in 2004. The government must stop its trade with companies who are providing the Israeli military with the equipment that they are using in their brutal attack on the Palestinian people in Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And this must include enacting the illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill, enacting the Occupied Territories bill, joining the ICJ case against Israel and increasing funding to UNRWA. Cancorla, a just and lasting peace between Palestine and Israel requires an end to the occupation and apartheid systems currently imposed on the Palestinian people and the establishment of an independent sovereign Palestinian state. Sinn Féin is committed to playing a constructive role with the Irish Government and international community to encourage and actively support dialogue between all sides and to develop a durable, inclusive and sustainable conflict resolution process. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Tully. Now, Deputy Boyd Barrett sharing with Deputy Smith and Deputy Kenny.
Can I also welcome the Palestinian ambassador, other members of the Palestinian community and activists to the gallery in particular? Can I welcome Zach Hania and his wife Batul and their children? And I'm delighted that Zach has escaped the horror of what Israel has been inflicting on the people of Gaza, but which, as we speak, continues as men, women and children are slaughtered by this genocidal regime. This day of Palestinian state recognition is the result of the endless and heroic resistance of the Palestinian people and the enormous protests and mobilisations of people across this country and across the world. It is that resistance, that protest, that has brought us to this day. But it should not have taken 7 months of a genocidal massacre being inflicted on the people of Gaza, with 35,000 people slaughtered, 15,000 children, Gaza destroyed and famine conditions imposed on the entire population of Gaza for us to get to this moment. The horror of the last 7 months is a direct result of the impunity that has been granted to Israel by the United States, by the European Union, including this state, for failing to impose sanctions
on a regime that has been guilty of ethnic cleansing, of occupation, of apartheid, of the siege of Gaza, of the systematic, ongoing, brutal, murderous oppression of the Palestinian people for decades. All of the European Union and the United States have the blood of Palestinians on their hands for failing to rein in this rogue regime. And symbolic recognition of the Palestinian state, while it is a welcome step forward, will not end the horror of what Israel is willing to inflict on the Palestinian people unless the succour, the support, the arms, the weapons, the political support, the trade relations that the European Union and the United States continue to extend to a regime that is capable of this horror ends. Is it now not obvious there is no atrocity that Israel is not willing to commit? None. They will do any horror to the Palestinian people. And you see, I have to, in the short time that is available to me, challenge the constant mantra of a two-state solution. We all want a ceasefire. We all want peace. We all want an end to this horror, whether it is Palestinians, whether it is Jewish people, Christians, or people of no religion. But is it not obvious to people now that the Israeli regime is not interested in any of those things? It was built on the expulsion of 750,000 Palestinians in 1948. It has been sustained every year for decades and decades by ethnic cleansing, by murderous occupation, and by apartheid. That is not the product of this or that government. It is written into the laws and constitution of the Israeli state. Indeed, former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar was absolutely right. I wish he'd said this when he was Taoiseach. There is a systematic apartheid operates in this regime. So will we say it is okay to continue with an apartheid system? That it is okay to continue to deny millions of Palestinians the right to return, which they have under international law, because a two-state solution will not give them the right to return. It will not dismantle the system of apartheid. Apartheid has no place in the civilized world. The Palestinian refugees, all of them, have the right to return under international law. And the people who are occupied have the right to resist. Those who defend apartheid have no rights under international law. Those who defend occupation or enforce occupation have no rights under international law. Only the people who are occupied have the right to resist, and they have the right to dismantle that regime. And what we need to do is do what was done to apartheid South Africa and dismantle this occupation, dismantle this regime that is capable of genocide. That's what we need, sanctions, as was done with apartheid South Africa. I hope this will be the first step towards that, but the people will have to lead, because we know governments have failed to do so up until now.
Ceann Carla, I haven't got much time, but there's brutal times and there's happy times in all our lives. And the happy time is today, where we can celebrate and welcome the recognition of Palestine. Some people will call it symbolic, but symbolism brings huge hope across the world. And where there's hope, there's solidarity and there's friendship from the people of Ireland. But there's also brutal times. And then brutal times continue in Gaza at this moment of time. If anybody watched the Channel 4 Dispatches programme last night, Kill Zone, they would be left cold in the face of inhumanity to humanity. It was an affront to humanity, where people, children, are slaughtered on a daily basis. And there has to be accountability for this, Ceann Carla. There has to be, because if there's not, that will be a stain on humanity. Israel has to be made accountable politically, economically and diplomatically, because if we don't, that again will be a stain on our history and our humanity. Sometimes there's no adjectives left in terms of what is going on at the moment in Gaza. But we have to keep hoping, we have to keep marching, we have to keep talking, because that's what gives the people of Gaza hope in terms of the out-and-out slaughter by the Israelis. Because if our humanity is gone, then everything is gone. We can't lose humanity, we can't lose our sense of humanity in terms of what's going on in Gaza at the moment. We have to keep hoping. We have to find peace. We have to find a political solution. But also we have to give solidarity to the people of Gaza at this particularly terrible time.
Ceann Comhairle, I want to, like everybody else, welcome everybody into the gallery and the ambassador here, and it's great to see you home, Zach. You're very welcome home. Delighted you got back and you and your family are here today. Just like what has been said already by many people, I think it's a very positive and historic move and an advance that we have recognised the Palestinian state today and are flying the flag. I just would like to ask the Ceann, and maybe he could answer it later, if the intention is to keep the flag flying like the Ukraine flag has flown for the last 2 years, because I think it would be important for as long as this genocide continues and as long as Palestine is occupied that we show that solidarity. And what we've done is brilliant, but it's been done on the back of a movement that has really overtaken society across all countries, across the world, an absolutely outstanding display of solidarity and support and anger and determination to free the Palestine people. But let's not forget, on Sunday, Israel did murder dozens of children and women in the most brutal way. And as their genocide intensifies, we need to do more than raise a flag. And here I do want to talk about the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign that really needs to be taken a hold of by the Irish state and imposed. So, for example, it's been mentioned already, but it's worth saying that every year this state pays nearly €300,000 to a company called Aeronautics Defence Industries, which is an Israeli company that maintains our drones, but it is also the company that makes drones that drop bombs all over the children of Palestine. And I want to ask the question, why is the Irish government fast-tracking 100 visas for Israeli engineers to fly in to work here with Intel, and while meantime Palestinians who are fleeing the genocide have to sleep in tents along the canal and then have their tents taken from them? There is a huge disparity between what we say and what we actually do. So I do think it's high time that we implemented the sanctions, the boycott and divestment. And people mention the Dunstore strike as an example, and it's an important one, but they were on strike for 3 years before the Irish government copped on and did the right thing and brought in legislation that boycotted South African goods and vegetables. Let's not do this to the people of Gaza. Let's act soon.
Deputy Patrick Costello, please.
Gurmaga Ceann Comhairle. Like others, I think this is a hopeful day. This is a day to celebrate. I was working in Palestine when, in 2014, when Sweden recognised the Palestinian state, and I saw firsthand the hope and the joy of the Palestinians around me, and Swedish flags appearing on taxis and everywhere. And you know, it was a celebration. It was a moment where they felt that they were their struggle was recognised, their struggle was seen, and that people were standing beside them. And I know that our recognition can give that same hope. And the fact that it's been done with Spain and with Norway, I think, adds all the more to it. So this is a really important moment. And as I say, it's really an important moment of hope. And hope is absolutely needed now, because in many ways the situation appears to be completely hopeless. We have an intransient Israeli government, as it was said earlier today in the House by several speakers, the most right-wing government ever in the history of that state. We have seen relentless settlement building, creating new facts on the ground, utterly eroding the Palestinian state that we are here to recognise and to try and protect. Not just that, but we see state-sponsored and state-supported violence from the settlers in those settlements that further puts pressure on the Palestinians, that leads to Palestinians being driven out of their homes, being driven out of their villages as their villages are attacked and burned by armed settlers, escorted and supported by the Israeli Defence Forces. Again, this is very much a deliberate policy of the government to remove Palestinians from their land. We have ongoing forced transfer, ongoing demolition of homes and villages, and without firm, strong action, places like Masafariyata, Arab al-Jahalin, Khan al-Amar will join places like Deir Yassin and El Zaytun that have already been wiped off the map by the Israeli government, that are nothing but ghost villages in towns that have been utterly destroyed and their residents massacred. Recognition is an incredibly important step to push back against that hopelessness, to show the Palestinians that we stand with them and we support them. But it is just a first step. We need to do more to put pressure on the Israeli government. We need to do more to put pressure on them to ensure that we are enforcing international law. Without a fair and just solution based firmly on human rights and international law, there is no hope for the region. So we need to be supporting international law and as part of a diplomatic solution in a quest for justice. And if Israel is ignoring that and ignoring the ICJ and ignoring the ICC, then we as a state that stands up for international law have a responsibility to ensure that the judgments of the ICC and the ICJ are enforced and made real and made meaningful. And yes, I do believe we need to see boycott, divestment, sanctions. I do believe we need to see the Occupied Territories Bill. I know we have advice from the Attorney General saying that the Occupied Territories Bill is illegal and couldn't pass. But that's just advice. Legal advice only becomes legal fact in front of a judge. So let's pass the Occupied Territories Bill and go to Brussels, or to Luxembourg, go to the CJEU and defend the bill. Because the bill does nothing more than to make real our commitments that we already have under international law. It is designed to fit perfectly into European Union law, and it is designed that to make real international law so that occupations everywhere aren't being supported. And that is an incredibly important step. It is the next step that we must take beyond recognition to ensure that we fight, that we push back against the Israeli government's agenda and actions here. Because yes, what we are seeing in Rafah and Gaza is horrendous and heartbreaking and appalling, but when the bombs stop falling and the hostages are released, the occupation will still be there, and we need to be aware of that and keep fighting against the occupation, even beyond this horrific current stage of violence. And I will leave it there. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Costello. Deputy O'Dowd, do you want to take the next, there's 4 minutes plus remaining in that, do you want to take it since you're here?
Ceann Comhairle, I'll be happy to do that. I just want to say that I'm absolutely appalled at the state of devastation in Gaza about the murder and the destruction of homes, and obviously the innocent women and children who are victims of the appalling aggression shown by the Israeli Defence Forces. I'm also appalled at the lack of a solution at this stage, and notwithstanding the fact that many governments, both in the Middle East and in Europe and indeed other parts of the world, are making every possible effort to find a solution, to find peace, to get a ceasefire, it has not been successful or achieved up to now. And I feel that, I know talking to young people, talking to, just how disgusted they are at the appalling loss of life. And what can we do about it? And I think that this House, at least today, outside the Oireachtas, outside our House here, that there are 3 flags flying. You have the Palestinian flag, the Ukrainian flag, and we have the European flag. And I think that shows that we embrace peace and we embrace finding solutions to problems through Europe. And I think, Minister, in particular, that is our job, to press inside the European Union with our colleagues and our friendly nations on the same side as us on this issue, that there must be significant intervention now, and its absence will only continue, and this appalling death and evil that is visited upon the people of Palestine is just absolutely and totally abhorrent. I would also want to condemn also and absolutely what Hamas has done to citizens, innocent civilians, men, women and children as well in Israel, and the appalling acts that they carried out. I think that Israel is using unacceptable amount of force in response, and I believe that there are other ways of getting outcomes which will destroy Hamas and at the same time not kill all of the innocent civilians that we are seeing being murdered every day and every night. I also welcome the orders of the International Court of Justice. This is the prime body that makes comments and judgments on international human rights and this humanitarian crisis. And it is absolutely essential that Israel must accept the orders of the International Courts of Justice and to halt its offensive, and in particular to allow aid into Gaza. And these court orders are binding, and Israel must be seen to comply with international law. As the Taoiseach have noted, if Israel fails to comply with Friday's International Court ruling, then we have to consider all options with our EU partners to ensure the upholding of international law. And one of the things that the two flags and the European flag show to me is the lack of power that the United Nations actually has as a body. They can pass resolutions left, right and centre. They can send peace soldiers from different countries into countries in Africa and in the Middle East to enforce a peace or to ensure that peace results. But both in the Ukraine and in Palestine, that is not happening. And I think that shows a real weakness at the very heart of the United Nations, and that they're failing in their duty of care to protect the most vulnerable people, both in the Ukraine and also in Palestine. So I would hope, Minister, that, and I would agree and support fully all the actions of the government, and I must say that Minister Martin, Minister for Foreign Affairs, has been exceptionally diligent, and he's been exceptionally outspoken in condemning the actions of Israel, and that is appropriate and proper as it should be. And I know that we in Ireland, we have a long history of occupation by a foreign power. It doesn't just go back 100 years, it goes back hundreds of years. It has been in the past a source of war and terror for many, many citizens through many, many generations. Thankfully, that all ended with the Good Friday Agreement, and that North and South and East-West, our relationship with Britain has significantly improved following the Good Friday Agreement. And it is a peace agreement that could be signed by all of the parties involved. I think that is the only way forward, and I support and fully would urge the government to continue their efforts, and I back all of the actions taken by this government, including the recognition of the Palestinian state. Thank
you, Deputy O'Donnell. Deputy Gould now sharing with Deputy Mairead Farrell.
Minister, what should have been a proud day and a nice day that this state recognises the Palestinian state really has lost a lot of that with what happened on Sunday and the horrific atrocity and the war crimes carried out by the Israeli state. When you look at the photographs and the pictures and the videos that come from there, and you hear the screams of people screaming as the Israeli government burned men, women and children alive. They burned them alive. And the world stands by while 15,000 children are being slaughtered. 35,000 men and women and children. And it's unbelievable, the genocide that's happening. A child with no head, and the Israeli government say it's a mistake. I hope that Benjamin Netanyahu burns in hell the same way them children and their families burned. I hope him and his generals and the far-right government in Israel, that when their God finally brings him to the resting place, that he deserves to burn in hell. Because what is happening now, not alone is it apartheid, not alone is it atrocity and a war crime, it's just horrific. It's just horrific what they're doing. Where is their soul? Where is the soul of the Israeli people that allows their government to do this to children? Where is their humanity? The Israeli people, the Jewish people, after everything the Jewish people have suffered down over the decades, that they would allow their government to do this to other human beings. Human beings. But in the eyes of Netanyahu and this far-right Israeli government, Palestinians are human beings. But today here, the Irish people say, we recognise Palestine. We recognise that they are human beings, just like every one of us. Shame on Israel. Shame on what they've done, and will never be forgotten.
Ara, today we formally recognise Palestine as a state. We recognise that Palestine is a state like any other, and we recognise that it belongs amongst the family of nations. Ireland's often said to be Palestine's strongest European supporter, owing to our shared colonial experience. The people of Ireland have long recognised Palestine, and it is good that the government has finally caught up with the Irish people on this. We share this recognition with Spain and Norway today, and Sweden, who recognised Palestine back in 2014, and we had an opportunity back then to do that too. Sinn Féin's motion was accepted by the Dáil 10 years ago, which would have paved the way for this. However, the government sat on its hands. Now, I want to pay tribute to those in the gallery here today and to all those who've been part of grassroots movements which have helped us to get to this point. People who've been active for years and in many cases decades. And of course, Minister, the many, many Palestinians who have spoken truth to power time and time again to make their voices heard in a world that simply refuses to listen. And as the late Palestinian poet Professor Rifat al-Hariri wrote just days before he was killed by an Israeli airstrike in December, "If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale." We recognise the Palestinian state against the backdrop of the continuation of a genocide unfolding in Gaza. The loss of over 34,000 lives, over 11,000 people missing, presumed dead, over 77,000 wounded, many with life-changing injuries. Recognition of Palestine's nationhood is not enough. It will not stop this genocide. It will not stop Israel's efforts to remove these people from their ancestral homeland. We need full-blown sanctions. The EU's double standards have been laid bare for all to see. We need to remove Israel's participation in Horizon Europe. We need the EU to revoke the EU-Israel Association Agreement. We need the imposition of the Occupied Territories Bill. Minister, we have a responsibility as Irish people to shout stop. We have to put our heads above the parapet and do everything that we can to stop this genocide.
Deputy Matt Shanahan, please.
Ceann Comhairle, Ireland has a deeply felt understanding of the desire of people for the recognition of their own place, their culture and existence. 800 years of occupation and a great deal of repression did nothing to quell the Irish desire for freedom, for self-determination, for self-rule and the international recognition of our civil rights. The Irish state, as it is today, is often used as an international reference as to how people with different cultures, ethnicity, religion, history can live in the same place, can live on the same land. The history of Palestine is not remote from the history of Ireland. Principally, it recognises the desire of people to live freely in their own state. The ownership of land and the ability of peoples to live peacefully on that land is at the heart of the Palestinian question. The question of who should reside in that space, who can or should claim ownership of that land has been an international question, actually dating back to 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. That favoured the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, an area that had been under Ottoman rule for centuries and was placed under British stewardship and governorship in 1920 after a League of Nations mandate. Post the Second World War, Jewish migration to Palestine was encouraged and supported, as was the move to the recognition of a State of Israel in what was considered to be the Jewish biblical home. This was in spite of the significant Arab population existing in the region. This culminated in 1947 with the United Nations partition resolution to divide Britain's former Palestinian mandate into Jewish and Arab states. The State of Israel declared its establishment on the 14th of May 1948, the eve of the British termination of the mandate. And that termination of the mandate subsequently led to the First Arab-Israeli War. Subsequent 1949 armistice agreements established Israel's borders over most of the former Mandate territory. A further 1967 conflict, the Six-Day War, saw Israel occupying the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and since establishing further settlement there. Israel has normalised relationships in recent times with some of its Arab neighbours, but the Arab and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been an ongoing and seemingly intractable problem. The peace initiatives put forward by both Arabs and the US governments over recent decades have failed to advance any recognition of a two-state solution or deal with the issues of the occupied territories. The military muscle provided to Israel, principally by the US, has allowed it to exert a strong military presence in the region, and in so doing it has failed too to deal with progressing the issues of the Palestinian question and the Palestinian homeland. In fact, Israel has largely carried out discrimination of the Palestinian enclaves in the Gaza Strip and occupied territories, and this has only served to increase hardline Arab resistance to the State of Israel. The hardline positions taken by the Israeli government in terms of its forcing its borders and its internal security has allowed Hamas claim political support for their ongoing campaign of border and rocket attacks into Israel. The degree to which this activity has the support of the wider Palestinian people is impossible to judge. But the actions of fundamentalist Islamic people within Hamas and the Palestinian movement is not, which culminated in the barbarism of December 7th with the indiscriminate murder of Israeli settlers and the taking of hostages who remain prisoners of Hamas. The main thrust of this activity was to develop a regional war, drawing in other Arab states in an Arab coalition. The response of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his right-wing government to invade Gaza with the stated purpose of annihilating Hamas and dismantling their war machine is also a mission that only serves to strengthen Arab resistance. The prosecuting of this war has been the indiscriminate bombing of population centres and refugees in pursuit of Hamas militants. The carnage and destruction is vast, and it will take years and perhaps decades to rebuild the infrastructure. The idea that the Palestinian people will forget or forgive in a similar timeline is uncertain, to say the least. The human toll can never be justified in terms of stated war efforts. We in Ireland know the destruction of civil conflict. We know the enduring hurt and the harm that violence causes. We know that ultimately peace cannot be achieved until warring sides agree to sit down, agree to seek a compromise solution. Israel has fought long and hard for recognition as an independent state. The idea that the Palestinian people should not be allowed the same rights is preposterous. That it is the State of Israel which opposes such rights is even more confounding given the genesis of its own state. The fact of the matter is, Israel's security cannot be assured in the future without arriving at a peaceful settlement with the Palestinian majority and its people. But this also requires a recognition from those allied to Islamic fundamentalism of the right of the State of Israel to exist too. What must be agreed is the recognition of a Palestinian state and its borders, also the rights of its people to have free movement throughout that country and to be given access to other countries where diplomatic relations recognise the rights of such people to travel in and out. The recent actions of Ireland, Spain and Norway to recognise the State of Palestine sends a strong message to the international community to back up previous resolutions of the UN General Assembly. Just as it is unacceptable that some in the Arab world would wish to see solely the destruction of Israel, so too it is unacceptable for the present Israeli government to adopt a position of no recognition for a future Palestinian state. War begets war, violence begets violence. The people who suffer most are the general population. They are the ones with the least power, the least influence, the least protection from smart bombs and military might. It is said you cannot kill an idea unless you kill a people. The willful destruction that those in hardline Arab positions and in hardline Israeli government wish to pursue, they cannot be condoned, they cannot be understood, and they must not be supported. The slaughter of innocent men, women and children on October the 7th can never be justified. Neither can the military response of the Israeli government, which at this point has gone far beyond anything to do with the actions of that infamous day. The Irish people, Ceann Comhairle, have travelled the road of being subject to imperialism, to colonialism and state-enforced discrimination. Despite all of that, our country has arrived at a place of recognition that for peace to be created, fostered and endure, the recognition of individual rights and individual histories must be at the forefront of any possible settlement. Despite culture, language, religion, skin tone, the truth of the Palestinian question is that it is a human conflict. Only human recognition, only human relations and human action can solve it. It is quite obvious that the present actors leading the war on both sides are very unlikely to be the people who will build the peace. That possibly remains a job for the international community at large that they can achieve, and Ireland must remain at the vanguard of those efforts.
Hoddy O'Sullivan now sharing with two others. Well, there's no two others. Deputy, sure, go on. We'll see what happens. There's deputies here. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Ms. Ceann Comhairle,
13 minutes.
I rise tonight to speak in favour of our nation's decision to recognise the right of Palestinians to exist in their own state. In 1980, it was my party that led Ireland to become the first EU member state to declare that a solution to the conflict in the Middle East lay in a two-state solution where both a fully independent Palestine and an independent Israel could coexist. As time has passed, and in particular in recent days, I am encouraged by the words of Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who has said that the recognition of Palestine today is not the end of the process, but the beginning. I believe that the recognition of Palestine today by Ireland, Norway and Spain may give impetus to ensure a solution can be found to the slaughter that is happening there daily. It is important to highlight that Ireland's decision today is not misrepresented as a hostile act to the State of Israel. Ireland's acknowledgement today of Palestine's right to exist and the Palestinian people's right to self-determination is not a hostile act against the Israeli government, as their Foreign Minister has repeatedly said in media at home. Our actions are an endorsement of our position that the solution to this conflict lies in two states, two equals, sitting around a table and coming to a peaceful resolution. We know only too well from our own troubled past that hate begets hate and violence begets violence. The Irish Government, in its move today, has stated unequivocally that we reject violence, subordination and exclusion, and that we reject the extremes in both Israel and Palestine that caused this conflict and now prolong it. What happened on October the 7th is to be condemned unequivocally for its savagery and brutality, but what is unfolding before our very eyes in Palestine today is military savagery, the violent subordination of a generation of Palestinians. A new pathway is now needed to ensure the international community rallies to endorse the rights of Palestinians to self-determination. If our actions here today symbolically demonstrate to the Israeli government that the world is watching, the world is appalled, and the world wants a peaceful resolution, then it will have served its purpose. Today's decision is not a reward for terrorism, as the Israeli Prime Minister intimated in a recent video statement. It is a plea to stop the violence, stop the warmongering, and stop the retribution. It is a call to a leader who has clearly overstepped and now himself is subject to action by the ICC to stop the bombing of hospitals, schools, accommodation, stop the massacring of the innocent, and deal with the legitimate Palestinian representatives to bring a lasting peace where the young of both sides can coexist. There can be no military solution to this conflict, and any further military action needs to be roundly condemned and repudiated utterly. The question now emanating from today is, will this first step by 3 European nations trigger momentum across Western Europe for others to follow suit? I note initial reactions from Germany and Britain look ominous, but the concession by Emmanuel Macron that the French may be open to reviewing their position is encouraging. After recent strikes in Rafah, President Macron tweeted that he was outraged and called for the respect of international law. What better way to demonstrate that outrage than recognising the right to statehood for those aggrieved parties being bombed in makeshift encampments, the displaced Palestinians of Rafah? Finally, Ceann Comhairle, there is a degree of unity here this evening and a feeling that our government has done right by us today. Nonetheless, it needs to be said that we are late to the table. Ireland, Norway and Spain are now amongst 145 nations that recognise the right of the Palestinian state to exist. While it is profoundly welcome, it can't be the end point, as the Taoiseach intimated in his speech earlier. We now need to reassess how we do business with the Israeli state and how we conduct diplomacy with that state. If, as the Taoiseach indicated, and I firmly believe him, that this isn't the end point, we now need to pressure and leverage other EU members to follow suit, and the next logical move is to follow through with that review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement and ensure that repercussions follow for Israel if the bombardment of Gaza continues.
Thank you. Deputy O'Connell, do you want to go ahead now?
Yes, thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, every parent, when they bring a child into this world, does so with the same mixture of hope and trepidation. We have the same hopes and fears as we take that tiny bundle into our arms, as we consider the enormous fragile potential of that human life. We hold in our mind's eye the milestones we hope to witness, the graduations, the weddings, the arrival of grandchildren, the skinned knees, the lost teeth, the broken hearts. And we pray in our hearts that we can help them steer that course into adulthood safely and in good health, that we can shelter them from the many threats of the wider world. This is the same for me, as an Irish dad, as it is for a mother in Israel or a father in Gaza. We all want the best for our children. We all want to protect our children. We all felt that in the wake of the October 7th attacks. We felt in some ways the outermost ripples of the shockwaves that convulsed the Israeli people as they saw the bright futures of their children snuffed out in an attack of ferocity and barbarism. And we feel it too in the response, a disproportionate and dehumanising response that violates international law and threatens our international rules-based system. We felt it viscerally as we witnessed the horrific scenes in Rafah just last Sunday. Parents gathering body parts of their children. Hopes shattered, futures exploded, bodies blown asunder. No parent could watch that without feeling at least a faint echo of that unimaginable loss. All conflicts end, so too will this one. But what shadow will it cast? How will a generation, both emotionally and physically maimed, conceive a pathway to a lasting peace? Who in the tents amongst the ruins of Rafah can dream of any kind of future for their children? Too long a suffering can make a stone of the heart. It's long been the view of the Irish people that the only path to peace lies in the two-state solution. We have learned hard lessons from our own history about the futility, as Paul Brady put it, of trying to reach the future through the past, trying to carve tomorrow from a tombstone. We were isolated in that view when we first put it forward. Now that idea is in the mainstream of international opinion on the matter. But for there to be a two-state solution, there needs to be two states. I applaud the decision of the Irish Government today, in tandem with our colleagues in Norway and Spain, and following the lead of many other nations across the world, to officially recognise the State of Palestine. I acknowledge the leadership of the Taoiseach, and in particular our Taoiseach in his role as Minister for Foreign Affairs in bringing this to pass. I thank them both, not as a member of this government but a citizen of this republic. The moral bravery needed to take such a decision should not be underestimated. In recognising the State of Palestine, we do not erode, diminish or deny the rights of any of the other nations of the world to exist in peace, nor do we support or endorse acts of depravity committed in the so-called service of any flag or nation. It is my firm belief that the long-term security and prosperity of the State of Israel will be enhanced, not eroded, by the recognition of a Palestinian state. The Israeli ambassador tells us that the recognition of the State of Palestine sends the wrong message. She says, "I don't think that this is the message that Ireland wants to send to the world. I disagree. I think it's precisely the message we want to send to the world. It is a message of peace. It is a message that recognises the common shared humanity of the child born in Gaza and the child born in Jerusalem, the equal intrinsic value of both of those human lives, their equal rights to hope, to dream, to aspire to a better future where they can live in peace and in security. Martin Luther King told us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Sometimes when the curve of that arc is at its aphelion, at its furthest from its anchor point, it can feel very hard to believe in that upward trajectory. But I say to the people of Palestine that in recognising your place among the nations of the world, this is some small effort from a small nation with its own history of repression to influence the course of history for the better. It's our fervent hope here that it brings you hope in this darkest of times.
Thank you, Deputy O'Connor. Now, Deputy Patricia Ryan sharing with Deputy Martin Brown.
Minister, what a long-awaited and momentous day to finally have the State of Palestine formally recognised by Ireland. Finally, the voices of those who marched, protested and petitioned in their thousands for international law to be upheld, who shouted loud and long for Palestine and her people to be recognised. At last, Minister, they have been heard. Ireland and the Irish, throughout our own struggles with oppression and occupation, have always had a unique affinity with Palestine. We understand their struggles, their longing for their land to be free, independent and sovereign. But recognition isn't enough, Minister. How can it be when, as we stand in this House, the people of Gaza are currently under siege? Gaza and her people are suffering a genocide in full sight of this world. Rafah, where Israel ordered people to flee to safety, is burning and being obliterated by Israeli bombs raining down indiscriminately on the tens of thousands of displaced people. Families and children being blown apart. I will repeat that piece again, Minister. Families and children being blown apart. Hospitals, doctors, paramedics deliberately targeted, killed, destroyed. Humanitarian aid blocked. This is Palestine's future. It's shameful. And if the bombs don't kill you, disease and starvation will. How much more must they endure? Israel's action must be recognised for the gross violations of international law they are, and Israel must be held accountable for that. The ICC decision must be upheld. Ireland may be a small island, but our voice is loud on the world stage and our influence is far greater. We have led the world in peace for our own island. Time for us to do it again so Palestine and her people can be free to enjoy a lasting peace. It's time for this government to use the momentous day as the first step, to use our influence at European level and international level to bring our pressure to bear to achieve a lasting ceasefire and an end to the senseless oppression and loss of life, Minister. Let's be very, very clear here. No matter what Benjamin Netanyahu says and claims, bombing Rafah is not a mistake. It is a deliberate slaughter of innocent, and Israel must be held accountable for it. And remember this, all eyes are now on Rafah.
Deputy Brown.
I want to welcome the Palestinian ambassador here, those that were in the gallery earlier, and I also want to thank those who have supported the Palestinian people down through the decades and our continued support. Sadly, the recognition of the State of Palestine has been a long time coming. It has been 10 years since the Dáil unanimously passed a Sinn Féin motion for this to happen. That delay and the reluctance to take action in good time has seen the people of Palestine continue to be oppressed, occupied and the subject of a system of apartheid. This has been facilitated by an international hesitance to call Israeli government out on their atrocities, which recently have resulted in the deaths of 36,000 children and adults, 189 UNRWA staff and 262 aid workers. Then there's the Sunday's indiscriminate slaughter in Rafah, which the Israeli government in its moral vacuum dismissed as a mere mistake or error. How dare they? This was mass murder and nothing else, and they're seen the world over. The reason the Israeli government acts with such impunity and treats its atrocities so dismissively is because many of the international community's leading countries failed to hold Israel to account for its breaches of international law. This inaction has emboldened the Israeli government in its quest to undermine any notion of a two-state solution, to break international law and destroy lives, safe in the knowledge that standards others are held to do not apply to them. The Israeli government has dismissed the ruling of the ICJ to halt its offensive in Rafah, yet the EU has also failed. Ursula von der Leyen provides them with cover, while a review of the EU-Israeli Association Agreement remains undone. Ultimately, the Israeli government has shown by its actions that it isn't interested in a peace settlement. Therefore, by recognising Palestine as a state, we wanted to have the same standing as the nations of the world in a quest for its independence. The two-state solution, self-determination and ultimately a lasting peace. But we must go further. The government must enact the illegal Israeli settlements divestments bill, the Occupied Territories bill, and join the ICJ case against Israel, use all diplomatic measures to end all military actions and end the occupation of the state we have formally recognised. World leaders must recognise Palestine as a state, deserving of the same rights as all others. Those resisting must stop standing by as genocide is perpetrated in front of a global audience. It is there now through social media for the whole world to see, Count Corla. And ultimately, the call made by so many campaigners across this country and the world has been heard. And it is now time for the Palestinian people to be heard. And we pledge our continued support to the Palestinian people. Gormagot.
Thank you, Deputy Brown. Deputy Alan Farrell, sharing with Deputy Bernard Durkin.
Thank you very much, Count Corla. Thank you very much. Count Corla, I've been somewhat reluctant to contribute to this debate, not because of my concern with the reaction of my constituents, but because the mere mention or appearance of taking sides is often met with scorn, or worse, the utterly corrupted idea of anti-Semitism. That shouldn't be the case. We must be confident in calling out that which is wrong. The taking of life is wrong. The taking of life in the name of a religion is wrong. The taking of life to expand one's territory is wrong. The taking of life to take back one's territory is wrong. Everything about this conflict, which did not start on October 7th, is wrong. This is a house of democracy. Proportional representation, single transferable vote is perhaps the truest form of democracy, and we have enjoyed that for over 100 years of democratic peace in this state, and how lucky we are to have done so. The Palestinian territories and the region has not been so fortunate. Count Corla, I abhor the killing of innocents, and as I conveyed to the Israeli ambassador last year, the response to barbarism should not be more barbarism. What terrorists have inflicted on the innocents of this region is barbarism, and what the Israeli government has done in response to that terrorism is also barbarism. Illegal settlements recognised as such by the United Nations, but only in name, funding and special arrangements by certain countries near and across the Atlantic perpetuate the cycle of expansion and of violence. In the last few months, we have watched in horror the indiscriminate slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent lives, women, men, and so many children, communities, schools, and places of worship. I've watched Israeli settlers destroy convoys of aid with my own eyes on television. I've seen images of kilometres and kilometres of aid trucks waiting. I've read of the cutting off of power supplies and of water supplies, the blowing up of power stations, the very capacity of Gaza to sustain life, and all the while the occupants of Rafah starve. 2 million people driven from their homes, corralled into camps, and then targeted from the sky. Indiscriminately shot while holding flags, crying out for help on your phone and on your television set every day. What the world is witnessing is the eradication of a people. The recognition of the state of Palestine is the very least that we as a state should do. The majority, the vast majority, 145 nations of this planet recognise the state of Palestine. When we cannot have peace in the region without a peace process. We cannot allow a corrupted government to exterminate the Palestinian people. Count Corla, I'm not a religious man. I'm a very tolerant person. I respect the right of those to practice their faith once it does not impact upon my lack of faith. I want to live in a society that respects the Jewish faith and the Muslim faith, just as I do. I respect the right of members of the Jewish faith to live free in their country of Israel, and I equally respect the right of members of the Islamic faith to live free in theirs. And it is on that basis that I share the government and the opposition's position that you cannot have a two-state solution if you do not recognise two states. The ordinary Israeli citizens deserve the same rights and freedoms as the ordinary Palestinian people. I asked the Israeli government through their ambassador to show restraint in October because, like so many in this House, I knew from the many, many decades of this conflict that the response from the Israeli Defence Forces would be severe. Now I absolutely demand that this war stops. Stop the slaughter of innocents. We in Ireland and in the European Union must demand that Israel stops. They have clearly failed to do so. We must therefore treat them as we would treat any other state that defies international law and the will of the people of our union. We must end trade, we must sanction those responsible, and we must not just call for peace, but we must arrange a suitable peace which can last and protect the innocent life throughout the region. Thank you, Count Corla.
Thank you very much, Deputy Farrell. Deputy Durkin.
Thank you, Count Corla. I am glad to have an opportunity to speak in this very important debate. And while many people in the House have said this has come too late, it should have come earlier, and so on and so forth, the fact is it has come. And it is the right decision, and it had to be taken, and it had to be taken now, in view of the happenings over the past 6 or 7 months. And the situation which wasn't started by the Israelis, but it was continued by the Israelis. And as one who tried to use some small influence with both sides in the past when I was chairman of the European Affairs Committee, the Israeli ambassador and the Palestinian charge d'affaires agreed to meet to discuss their various differences. And they did. And they were very amicable, and they were very respectful towards each other, and the meeting went very well. Then came Operation Cast Lead, and everything was reversed. And then came the recriminations against the Israelis, and then came, including in this House, and then there was the isolation of the Israeli position, and then there was the reaction amongst the fundamentalists in Israel, and we are where we are today as a result of those happenings combined. No one action, no one move by anybody was the total and absolute cause. But things degenerated very rapidly. And that's what happens in a situation where nothing happens and where the vacuum is covered and is filled by people who have no regard for peace, have no regard for human life, have no regard for democracy, and this can happen on both sides, and it has. And we should know about it in this country more than any other, because we've had our own experiences in the past. And as the Queen once said, some of the things that we did to each other might have been better if they hadn't been done at all. The fact of the matter is this, that when all is over, when all is said and done, there needs to be something left at the end of the day on which to build a peace process. And I believe, and several other people were of the same opinion, that there needed to be, over the past number of years, a platform that the opposing sides could present their grievances. And the United Nations should be that, but for various other reasons that I won't go into now, they weren't seen as that by the Israelis. The situation now is still going to be very fragile. From here on in, we, the outsiders, in this House and in houses across Europe and across the globe, must do everything possible to encourage the coming together of people who have been at each other's throats for thousands of years, not just for hundreds of years, or for millennia, or for decades. The fact of the matter still remains that it has got to be worked upon. So this recognition of the state of Palestine by 3 European governments on the one day is important. It shows indication, because one has to hark back to our own days in that particular situation, when the leaders of this country went abroad to encourage recognition of the state of Ireland. And it was done, very well done. It was seen as being important then. and several people were sent to several parts of the globe. The result was that we did get that kind of recognition at the end of the day. There were terrible atrocities committed by both sides, unforgivable atrocities committed by both sides. And as there were in the period up to very recently. But at the end of the day, there has to be some method of talking to each other, of establishing bridges, of trying to create the footpath that will lead to something better. I think the fact that that has been ignored for so long doesn't mean that it's impossible. The fact is that I remember being in meeting with the Palestinians in Palestine, in various locations, and the Israelis over the past number of years, as did several other members of this House, led us to understand the distance between both sides and the inability to trust each other, the suspicion of each other. And that has to go. If we're to move forward from where we are now, it still has to go. And it's reminiscent of the peace process in this country, when the leading protagonists were arrayed against each other, as it were. And from the beginning, there was more emphasis on the difference between them. But it eventually led to the situation and the recognition that there was more in common, in the common interest and the common good, than could be ignored. And I know that it was said at the end of the day that some of the protagonists, two of the main protagonists, had said it was frivolously suggested that they had seen God. Well, they had. Impossible as it may have been to visualize, but they had. And what they had seen was, they had seen the fact that 30 years of appalling atrocities in this country, on behalf of peace, on behalf of the people of this country, in pursuit of an ideal, a correct ideal, but that the 30 years of atrocities had achieved nothing. And the only thing that it had achieved was the deaths of everybody associated, and some who weren't associated at all, and the countless victims who were innocent, including children. So I think we learned a lesson, and they learned a lesson, and they saw God. It's now time for the people across the globe, in relation to the Palestinian-Israeli situation, to see God as well, and to recognise that what has gone on before is not acceptable. And there's no sense in saying that it is. There's no sense in suggesting that, well, a certain amount is allowed in certain cases and retaliation is understandable. Retaliation, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, will only bring one thing: a lot of people with very poor sight and no teeth, because there is nothing that ever should be, we should never allow ourselves to go down that road. So recrimination and retaliation, to my mind, are unacceptable. And the time has come to put the building blocks together, to be reasonable towards each other. Recognise that we come from different situations, and try to put in place the necessary measures that will lead to something better than we have looked at for the last 50, 60 years and more.
Thank you very much, Deputy Bernard. Now, Deputy Marion Harkin is not with us, but Deputies Pringle, Connolly and Collins are sharing time, I believe.
Michael Cancola, and all eyes are on Rafah as we are forced to watch in horror the utter brutality of Israel's attacks on Palestinian people. The level of bloodshed and devastation that the Palestinian people have had to endure, particularly in the last few months, is unimaginable. Israel's bombing of a displaced camp of tents is indefensible. The images and stories coming out of Rafah are truly gut-wrenching. What's worse is that the international community has allowed this to happen. What's happening in Rafah is happening because Israel has not been punished for the previous atrocities it has committed against Palestinians. Israel has been protected by the US and the EU while it continues its murderous invasions. Israel has been facilitated and even armed by the US and the EU to carry out this genocide. The recognition of the State of Palestine is a symbolic gesture, but it is an empty one if we continue to be complicit in Israel's genocide of Palestine as well. Ireland is Israel's fourth biggest market for all types of goods, and Ireland's exports to Israel of restricted dual-use goods that have potential military purposes grew nearly sevenfold last year, from €11 million to more than €70 million. How can we allow this? How can we claim to care about the Palestinian people while at the same time arming those who are causing them this devastation and destruction? It is truly sickening to think of it. This government has continued to allow the shipment of dual-use goods to Israel and yet wants a pat on the back for simply recognising the state of Palestinian people. We should have recognised Palestine decades ago. Most countries across the globe already recognise the state of Palestine. We were an outlier, along with some other EU countries, the UK, the US, Canada and Australia, in not recognising the state of Palestine until now. Recognising statehood is the very least we could do at this point. What Palestine needs now is action. The people of Palestine desperately need the government to stop facilitating this genocide by allowing the US aircraft to pass through Shannon and to end its trade relationship with Israel. It is time to take meaningful action and ensure that we play no part in aiding Israel's apartheid regime. In his opening statement, the Taoiseach said there is an onus on every country and on the European Union to use every lever at our disposal to bring about a ceasefire. And it is no longer enough to just condemn, it is no longer enough just to be repulsed. All I am asking is that the Taoiseach stay true to his own words and that he can start by passing the Air Navigation and Transport Arms Embargo Bill 2024 in the Shannon tomorrow. The bill looks to provide restrictions on the transport and export of weapons through the state to Israel, including where they are coming from or going to a country where exports weapons as well. If the Taoiseach was being honest in his opening statement, then he should have no issue with restricting the transport of weapons to Israel, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response on this.
I welcome the opportunity to say a few words on this. It's just over 3 minutes, so I want to be as precise as possible. And first of all, I want to welcome the Palestinian ambassador, who over the last number of months has acted with utter professionalism in the face of genocide and the slaughter of our people. And I have found her at every stage to be utterly professional while full of humanity. In contrast to the spokespeople for the Israeli government, who have on occasions been given free rein on our media and who have exercised their right, which I would question seriously, to push propaganda and a particular version of events. And so we're here today, and I welcome it as a momentous day. As I said earlier today, it has come much later than I would have liked, but it has come, and it is a day to be recognised, and I want to thank the government for doing that and for raising the Palestinian flag. It follows the General Assembly resolution of the 10th of May, which determined that Palestine is now qualified for membership of the UN. 143 countries in favour, 9 against and 25 abstentions. And so I would have liked today, in addition to the good news and the positive designation of the recognition of Palestine as a state, that we would follow that, Minister, with what actions we're going to take, because otherwise they're just sweet words that are worth nothing. And as we talk here now, I understand from news reports there's a further bombing on tented community, on people who have already been displaced and sought refuge in tents are being bombed as we speak. And you know, I've come near the stage where I have no words left, and I'm tired of the sweet words and no action. And we're constantly waiting for Europe, and Europe has distinguished itself by standing in solidarity with the government through its military. It's carrying out a genocide. Van der Leyen, in the name of Europeans, said we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. And our government is willing to vote for her to continue in position. Now, I'd ask you to reflect on that, Minister. How is that possible if our words are going to mean something? And then we have the Occupied Territories Bill that's in abeyance since 2018, tabled by the courageous Senator Black. We have other legislation, and we have the trading agreement still in existence, still trading through Europe and Israel, and we keep saying we have to wait for Israel. Well, we can't wait any longer because we'll have nobody alive in Palestine. And no, I'd love to throw down these words, and I wish that you would throw down those scripts and stand up as human beings and say, this is utterly wrong. This cannot go on. This is not self-defence. This is complete slaughter of the innocent. And we are part of that if we don't take action. And in response to questions I've tabled in relation to what we're exporting, we have breakdown of dual-use export authorisations. We have now gone, in 1 year, we've gone from 7.7 million exports to Israel to 70.4 million in 1 year. Could you explain that to me, Minister, how we've jumped? What's behind that jump if we're seriously interested in calling Israel to account for its slaughter and for its genocide? How could we be continuing to do trade with that country? And I'll finish by saying I will have nothing to do with anti-Semitic comments. They're not the same thing at all to call out the Israeli government for what they're doing. I'm out of time.
Thank you very much. Deputy Joan Collins.
Thank you. First of all, I'd also like to welcome the Palestinian ambassador here today and everyone who was in the gallery earlier on. I'd like to start by sending solidarity to the 1 million Palestinians besieged by the Israeli onslaught in Rafah. Ireland and the world is standing in shock and horror of what we're seeing unfold. Now we must come together to force Israel to stop this genocide. I think it was a proud day last week when Ireland stood in front of the world, along with Spain and Norway, and announced we would recognise Palestinian statehood. We will not just be recognising the Palestinian state, we'll be recognising the 70 years of struggle by the Palestinian people to hold on to their right for justice, self-determination and peace. I've seen it suggest that somehow by recognising Palestine we are rewarding Hamas. By recognising Palestine we're showing that we will not reward genocide. Over 36,000 people have died since Israel began its military campaign last October. They have attempted to drive Palestinians from Gaza by inflicting terror, starvation and destruction on them. They are attempting the wipeout of Gaza from the face of the earth. Recognising Palestine is a small show of defiance in the face of this genocide. What Hamas did on the 7th of October was horrific. And what Israel are doing now to the Palestinian people is genocide. I welcome that the International Court have named Netanyahu, the Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant and 3 Hamas leaders, Sinwar Mohammed Diaf and Ismail Haniyeh, for war crimes. We will never know the true death toll from this attack in Gaza. 31 out of 36 hospitals have been damaged or destroyed, and the World Health Organization has recorded over 890 attacks on health facilities since Israel began its current campaign. There are reports of bodies being found in the mass grave at Nasser Hospital with their hands tied behind their backs. Israel has systematically destroyed Gaza's ability to count its own dead. Last year saw nearly 600% increase in Irish exports to Israel that have dual civilian and military use. Many members have mentioned this today. Dual-use products made up 13% of Irish exports to Israel in 2023. That is compared to 0 to 1% on average to other countries. Minister, every year Ireland pays Israeli government-owned weapons company Aeronautics Defence Industry $250,000 to maintain drones we have bought from them. This is the same company supplying aerial vehicle and drones being used to kill Palestinian people in Gaza. We have spent $14.7 million on military imports from Israel over the last decade. Ireland is now Ireland's 4th biggest market for all types of goods, with sales mostly of computer circuits growing to $4.8 billion. There is no doubt our continued trade with Israel, especially military imports, is fuelling this genocide. This will be remembered for what it is, a genocide facilitated, supported and supplied by the West. We'll be remembered for how we react, and we are still fuelling this genocide. These exports must stop. We must divest from Israel. We must implement sanctions now. The world must force Israel to the table to negotiate meaning and lasting peace. We need a state-led campaign of boycott, sanctions and divestments until there is a deal for peace, independence and self-determination for all Palestinians. And I believe the Israeli people can play a role in this and remove Netanyahu, remove this government, get your family members home and negotiate peace.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Now we'll go back for a minute to Deputy Richard O'Donoghue.
Concorla, what value is given on life? and to recognise Palestine, if it saves one life, isn't it worth it? If history is a funny thing when you look at it one way, and when you look at it back, it's something that's taken for granted. When Hitler was on his reign, over the media waves, they said that humanity would never see something like this again. And then we went Rwanda, when the Hutsis and the Tutus slaughtered each other and turned on each other's families. We said that we'd never see that again. Then we have the war in Ukraine, and people said we'd never see that again. And now we have Israel and this war. God rest my father, and he will be 113 years old today. Born in 1911. How many wars did he see if he had lived? He's dead since 2009. It's becoming more and more frequent every decade now. It's becoming more frequent. And it's coming closer and closer to home, which is a very scary thought when you look at it. And I see people fighting every day of their life, and one person comes to mind because we're going to do a fundraiser for her this weekend, and it's Carol Liston O'Connor, who is fighting for her life and 5 children with motor neuron disease, and she's fighting for her life to spend one more day with her children. And every week and every month we're looking at people being killed needlessly, and every day, every hour, every second. And when you see people at war that have no respect even for the humanitarian people that go out to try and help people to feed them, and then they just dismiss it as in saying, oh, I'm sorry about that, we killed 34 people. What type of people are we dealing with that have no respect for life? And what is it all about? Greed, money, minerals under the ground, whether it is oil or whatever it is? What is it that they're actually fighting for? More land? More power? But yet the same people that they say they represent, they have no respect for them. Well, I have one thing to say to the people. We will all go in to the ground in the same box, into the ground. And as an old saying in this country, there is no hitch on a hearse. And no matter what you do in this life, you should respect people for regardless what religion they are, respect them for whatever race they come from, have respect, and hopefully they will give you the respect that whatever you follow in life. And when we do come to the end of our days and we are going into the ground to our next reward, the people will say, that person tried to help me in life and respected me. There is very little respect left in the world when you see the amount of wars that are going on at the moment. And if I hope for one thing, is that people finally learn that life is such a precious thing. And our ancestors lived for long life and worked hard. And now people just think, like that, we can just end your life. And they don't have any respect for anyone's life. Any person that has no respect, in my mind, they don't even come into my thoughts. I think the world is becoming a horrible place when we can see a handful of people dictate to the world and dictate wars and bring hardship on people. So last Concordia, my message to the people that are raining war just to get more power, or whatever they are, land or whatever, there is no hitch in their hearse. And when they go to there, I tell them they can take none of this with them. They should use their time on this earth to help the people and not cause harm. Thank you.
First of all, I want to welcome the Palestinian head of mission here to the House today, who is soon to be the ambassador, and we look forward to working well with you in many years to come. Our recognition of the State of Palestine today fits three fundamental purposes, and indeed many, many more. First of all, it makes clear our view that it is time Palestine takes its place amongst the nations of the world, that his right to self-determination, self-government, territorial integrity and sovereignty must now be vindicated. Secondly, it is an expression of our belief that the equal right to self-determination, peace, security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. The aspirations of both peoples must be afforded equal legitimacy, based on a two-state solution that delivers a just and sustainable peace. Thirdly, it is a reiteration of our fundamental conviction that the only just and sustainable peaceful solution for both Palestinians and Israelis is the implementation of a two-state solution ending the Israeli occupation of Palestine. I do want to thank the deputies for the contributions to this significant debate, and I think there is not just widespread support for this here in the House, but generally across the Irish nation today, to see that all united in this on their behalf. There is general agreement in this House for the recognition of the State of Palestine, which the Government announced last week and formalised earlier today. The recognition of the State of Palestine has been discussed in this House on many occasions in recent years. It has been mandated by the Dáil since 2014, and it was included in my own party's election manifesto in advance of the last election, and it was included in the programme for government in 2020, subject to the discussions informing the government at that time. Recognition of the State of Palestine is a show of solidarity, of support, of hope for a peaceful future. It is the acknowledgement that the Palestinian people have the right to determine their own destiny. It is a symbol of the bonds and friendship between the two peoples in a time of immense pain and suffering. And we in Ireland know what it is like to have such difficulties in a divided country. And I think we have a shared DNA with them when it comes to that particular issue. And that's why the people of Ireland have a very clear view on Palestine and on Israel, and they know who has been suffering the most all over the years. And I think that's where the heart and the minds of the Irish people are firmly based, and thank God for that. The Government has worked closely with Norway and Spain over recent months to coordinate recognition, standing up for the two-state solution and a future based on peace and security, and for the Palestinian people. Now is the right time to take this step, and it is extremely positive that we are able to do so with like-minded countries. Countries that, like Ireland, have a strong history of a commitment to a two-state solution to a lasting peace in the Middle East based on security, prosperity and freedom. And I will say some people might have thought this was a difficult time because of the troubles that have gone on over the last, and the incessant killing over the last 7 or 8 months. But I think for us not to proceed with what was in our programme for government because of the current violence would have been to take a back seat in the light of the violence that's going on there. And this government and the people of Ireland, I think, maybe now more than ever, is actually a more appropriate time to make this statement, especially in the middle of this conflict. Ireland's most pressing concern remains the horrendous violence being carried out in the Gaza Strip. We have seen in recent days the further devastation caused by the Israeli military actions in Rafah, the killings of civilians, including children, in a place where they were seeking refuge from unimaginable horror is appalling. And many deputies have referred to this during the course of their debate. this debate here today in relation to the innocent children, the mutilation of bodies that we've seen, and the destruction and total disregard for human life. And it touches the core, I think, of every decent person on the planet, and we share that here in Ireland. We need an immediate ceasefire and an end to the killing, which has been a daily feature for the last 7 months. We need the unconditional release of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, and we need right now a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian aid reaching the people of Gaza safely and unhindered. People in Gaza need water, food, fuel and medicine. They need it urgently, they need it today. We have heard repeatedly from UN agencies and international organisations that it simply is not happening. The situation continues to deteriorate. Israel's strikes continue to kill civilians. The people in Gaza still do not have access to adequate food and water, while the UN says northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. We have seen crossings closed and aid disrupted, and this must end. Israel must ensure that there is full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip. Ireland has long supported the Palestinian people via Irish aid. Earlier this year, when Commissioner General Lazzarini visited Dublin, the Taoiseach announced €20 million for the UN Relief and Works Agency. That agency plays a part that is vital to the region, and I am pleased that many donors which suspended their funding have now restored that. I was very pleased personally to attend a meeting of the Foreign Affairs Development Committee at EU level recently, where we put pressure on the European Commission itself to restore the funding that they had partially suspended, and it's important that this must continue, but that is no good if we can't get unhindered access with the delivery of the humanitarian aid. We will continue to support civil society, peace building and education. Ireland is helping to build a future for Palestinians beyond the current conflict, because someday the conflict will end, and I think what happens after the end of conflict is so important to work on a long-term peace agreement, because we need peace to sustain when it does eventually come, even though it doesn't look or feel like it here today. But the day will come, and I am confident of that. The government's recognition of the state of Palestine forms only part of our policy to support the Palestinian people in their hour of most need and help. Nevertheless, it is a significant step, and you can see that by some other countries and their reaction to us and to Norway and Spain in the last day or so on this matter. But be that as it may, we take that on the chin, and I think it's important what we are doing. This has been Ireland's long-standing policy, and the future of the region includes a Palestinian state based on discussions that happened in 1967, and those serve as a basis for going forward. The current crisis, however, has brought the future of Palestine into the spotlight of international attention, and it is possible and positive that the Arab states have come together to present a peace vision. We need these proposals and solutions which have the buy-in from the region, which is an area where previous initiatives have failed. So this can't be done in isolation without the support of surrounding countries, without the support of Ireland and various other countries, and without the support of the United Nations. And it's important to put on the record that we will very pleased with the vote at the United Nations in favour of this issue recently. We have been to the forefront in advocating for a European Union position on this, and we believe our work is actually making a positive impact on that. If we turn the clock back to last summer, if we had raised the issues we're raising now, nobody would have been listening. But we've been consistent, not a lone voice, but a strong voice, even though we're a small nation. And people are listening, and our view is getting traction at EU level, which is very important as well. The government's position remains unchanged, and I keep reiterating this: a two-state solution, Israel and Palestine, that delivers essentially security and dignity for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And I have no doubt that the people in Israel themselves want this to end as well, notwithstanding the views and actions of the particular government. And it's important someday soon that they have a general election sooner rather than later, where the people of Israel can express their views in relation to what's going on as well. And I think that's particularly important. And recognition of Palestine is not an end in itself. It marks a new chapter in Ireland's relationship with the Palestinian people, and I welcome the representatives from Palestine here today and in the Visitors' Gallery during the debate earlier. And we are playing our part to strive towards peace in the region. And I think everybody knows when it's all over, Ireland has a long history of supporting UN peacekeeping missions, and I think where we get to eventually peaceful solutions, I look forward to, in the decades ahead, that Irish soldiers will be out there on peacekeeping missions to ensure when peace does eventually come, but it doesn't seem like that today, but it will happen, that Ireland will be out there making sure that peace holds with our people from our army for decades to come, and that's what it will take. Thank you.
That concludes statements on Ireland's recognition of the state of Palestine. And I just want to acknowledge the presence of the soon-to-be formally appointed ambassador from Palestine, the first ever, and who has sat through this discussion for almost 4 hours. So I think that's not easy to do given what's ongoing in our country. Now, Thomas Rayleigh Buggerai, Biji, Gano Privajik Namal, Agus Harid, Tarishkent Modulate, Tihiok, Uderas Archul, a Hawal, Agus